So, are you a to-do list person? Some of us, we get up and we make a to-do list for our day. I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do this. And if we check off our to-do list, it's been a great day. Some of us are to-do list people. Some of us are just going about our day willy-nilly here and there. A to-do list, though, it shows your priorities. I've got to get this done. I've got to get that done. I've got to make my day successful. It shows our priorities for the day, for the week, for the month. Priorities are important. Today we're going to be in 2 Kings. We're going to look at the priorities of a king. Joash was king of Israel, king of Judah, and he had some priorities. And one of those priorities was the temple. You see, Joash became king at age 7. That sounds crazy. But see, his grandmother she'd taken over the kingdom. She killed all her relatives and she'd taken charge. But Joash had been saved. He'd been hidden away in the temple for a few years and he grew up there. And at age 7, he becomes king. And we don't know exactly how old he is when our story picks up today, but he demonstrated a priority that was the temple. He saw the temple was in need of repair. It had gone down over the years. It was like 125 to 150 years old at this point, and it needed some servicing done. But also the temple had been mistreated. Some people had gone in there and they had stripped out some valuable things and taken them and used them for other purposes, or they had just gone in there and just done with it what they wanted to do with it. And that's some things that God didn't approve of. Joash's priority was repairing the temple. We're going to see that. We're going to see that today, that he put in place a plan. He put in place some people to accomplish the repairs of the temple. So let's pick up and let's see what Joash's initial plan was. 2 Kings chapter 12, verses 4 through 8. Then Joash said to the priests, "All the dedicated silver brought to the Lord's temple, census silver, silvers for vows, and all the silver voluntarily given to the Lord's temple. Each priest is to take it from his assessors and repair whatever damage is found in the temple." But by the 23rd year of the reign of King Joash, the priest had not repaired the damage to the temple. So King Joash called the priest Jehoiada and the other priest and asked, "Why haven't you repaired the temple's damage? Since you haven't, don't take any silver from the assessors. Instead, hand it over for the repair of the temple." So the priest agreed that they would receive no silver from the people and would not be the ones to repair the temple's damage. Now, Joash developed a plan to fund the repairs of the temple. He said all the dedicated silver brought to the temple. That's a general idea, all the money that comes in. Well, then he gives us some specifics. First, he says all the census silver brought in. And this is kind of just like your general giving to the temple. It had become almost like a tax in that day, but it was really the general giving to the temple. Then he says the silver brought in for vows. And this is like someone makes a vow to the Lord, and they come and they give a special offering representing that vow. It's like, I'm going to keep this vow. And then it says any voluntary silver brought into the temple. This is just somebody who wants to give a little extra money to the temple work, to the ministry of the priest. And so you have these 3 different types of giving that's going to use to repair the temple. Now, I want us to bring this into modern day, and what does this mean for us? What kind of offerings, what kind of giving do we participate in? Well, if we think about these 3, really the first one, the census silver that it's called there, that's kind of like our general giving to the Lord, giving to God's kingdom, general giving to the offering or our tithes. And the tithe is really important here. That's kind of what we want to think about. We give our tithes to God's kingdom to do God's kingdom work. Generally, we've gleaned from Scripture that that's about 10%. Not about, it is 10%. We give 10% of our income to the ministries of the Lord. The second type of offering that he mentions here is vows. Silver giving in relation to a vow. Well, you might think about it in this way for us. We might feel led to give special offering to help a kid go to camp, to help someone go on a mission trip. Those type of things. We say, God's kind of leading us to do a certain thing, just like he would lead someone in the Old Testament to give a vow. He's leading us to give to a certain aspect of ministry. Then it says, the last thing it says here is voluntary gifts. Maybe you just got a little extra money. Maybe you got a bonus, or maybe you just found a pot of gold in your backyard and you want to give that to the ministries of God. See, this is kind of bringing this forward to our day, but we can see that our giving is important. Our giving gives to God's kingdom work. Go back and look at verse 6. What does it say happened when all this plan was put into place? What does it say happened when the priests began to do the work? Well, you see, nothing happened. They didn't do the work. Now, we don't know why they didn't do the work. We don't know why the temple stayed in disrepair, and we don't really know how long it was. But I think we can maybe glean a couple things. One commentator says it wasn't so much they were misappropriating the funds. It's not so much that they were slick, it's just that they were slow. Maybe they were inept. Maybe they just didn't have the skill set to do that type of work. Maybe they were really good at offering sacrifices, really good at ministering to the people and doing that type of thing, but maybe they just weren't good at repairing the temple. Maybe they just didn't have time. They had a lot of other stuff going on. They were busy doing their regular ministry for the Lord, and maybe they just didn't have time. We don't really know why they didn't repair the temple, but it's clear that Joash put them in charge. They didn't do what Joash told them to do or instructed them to do, and therefore the job didn't get done. This shows us that Joash had a plan. He put that plan into motion. Those he tasked with it couldn't do it, and now he's got to readjust, reevaluate what he needs to do, because his priority is getting the temple straight, getting the temple repaired. So let's see what he does next. Then the priest Jehoiada took a chest, bored a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the Lord's temple. The priest who guarded the threshold put into the chest all the silver that was brought to the Lord's temple. Whenever they saw there was a large amount of silver in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest would bag up and tally the silver found in the Lord's temple. Then they would give the weighted silver to those doing the work, those who oversaw the Lord's temple. They, in turn, would pay it out to those working on the Lord's temple, the carpenters, the builders, the masons, and the stonecutters, and would use it to buy timber and quarried stone to repair the damage to the Lord's temple, and for all the expenses for temple repairs. So, something I've learned over the past few years, you only get to live once, and you only get to learn things once. And so Joash, he's only been king this one time, and he's having to learn how to do things. He's never repaired a temple, so he's learning the process. And he realized my first plan really wasn't good. All the offerings that came into the temple were to be used for all the regular ministries of the temple, and then they were also supposed to be used to repair the temple. And I was going to take the guys who were already doing the ministry of the temple, and they were going to do the work to repair the temple. Well, Joash realized this isn't working out. This isn't the way we need to do things. We need to change things up, do things a little differently, get a better plan. So he said, okay, guys, we're going to do this. I'm going to put a special box by the door. And when people come in, they're going to drop their silver in there. And we're going to use that silver to repair the temple. You see, Joash had a priority of not just the regular maintenance of the temple and the regular running of the temple, but also the repairs of the temple. So he came up with this better plan. I think we see a couple things here. First, we see a proper allocation of funds. He said, we're going to take the money that comes into this box, and it's going to be dedicated to that ministry. You see, in the temple, like we today in the church, we have a budget. We say we think God's going to give us this much money to use this year. You see, God has all the money. God has all the resources, but God lets us use a certain amount. And we have to say, God's going to send us this amount to use this year for ministry. How are we going to use that? You see, our priorities determine how we're going to use that. Every year, I'm not sure how it's done in your church, but in many churches, a committee comes together. A group of people who are looking to the future. They're looking to see, what does God want us to do? And they say, now, how are we going to use what God sends us to do what God wants us to do? And they began to apportion that. They began to figure out, well, we need X amount of dollars to minister to children. We need X amount of dollars to send overseas to missions. We need X amount of dollars to make sure the doors don't fall off the hinges. We got to make sure we have enough money for repairs and maintenance. You see, you take what God gives you and you divide it up. Same applies to your family. What does God give you and how are you going to use it? Well, that's what Joash had. He had that initial set of offerings and they had a budget for it. Well, he said, we need something on top of that. We need this box over here to collect a special offering. We do that in the church today. For example, that committee that comes together, they might say, you're going to use, $1,000 this year for college ministry, to minister to college kids on the local campus. And so the person in charge of that ministry has $1,000 to use that year to do college ministry. Well, if someone one day, maybe they see a row of college kids come in on Sunday morning, and God piques their interest. And man, we're doing a lot of work with college kids. Maybe we need a little extra money for that. $1,000 is good, but I want to give a little extra just to ministering to college kids. Well, that money then comes into the church budget, and so now we have $1,100 to spend on college kids this year. And so the church says for all the greater tithes and offerings, $1,000 is going to go to college kids. And then this person gives $100 more toward that. And so that's a special offering. It's like what the people put in the box by the temple, and it can only be used on college kids. We can't go take that $100 and go spend it for juice for the nursery because someone said, no, that's just for college. And so that's what this money's for. It's apportioned to a certain thing. And so then also we see a proper accountability. You see, if you read the text, you saw that when the money came in, it was guarded, and then it was counted by two guys. Someone from the king's household, his secretary, and then someone from the temple. You know, it's important for us to make sure that the resources that God sends to ministry are taken care of, that someone doesn't be tempted to use that or take that or use it in a different way. Many churches have ways to do that. You have policy and procedures set up with the way money comes in, the way money goes out. But also we see a proper apportionment. You see, God guided Joash, and Joash guided his people to make sure that those who did the work got paid. You know, it's really important that the ministry of the church, that someone steps up and do things. Someone steps up and says, I'm gonna wash the van. And they come up to the church and they get out the water hose and they get out the soap and all that, and they wash down the van. That's important to happen. And their ministry is validated. Their ministry is recognized. Thank you for washing the van. It was looking rough after that trip to the beach or whatever trip the youth went on. We really appreciate that. It's great. But you know, maybe once a year you take the van down to town and you get somebody to maybe deep clean it. Maybe put some wax on the outside, shine it up real good, get that little smudge off here and there. You see, that person's going to do a deep clean, and you take it to their business and they do that. And so you know what? That's their business. That's the way they make money. That's the way they support their family. That's the way they support their employees. And it's important that you pay people who do work like that. It's important that maybe someone comes around occasionally at the church and they go into a room and they come up on a Saturday, maybe they're volunteering to clean a room. Man, they're going to get down on their hands and knees and they're going to clean the carpet. They're gonna make sure they go and they kind of go through the cabinets and get out all the old literature and all that stuff. And that's important. It's also important that the church pays the person who regularly comes in and cleans the church. You see, we allocate our money in a certain way, our resources in a certain way. And then we make sure that we have security and accountability with those resources. Then we make sure that we pay the people who come and do work as part of their business, as part of the way they make a living. So that's what Joash did. Joash set this system up to do that. He had a budget and he had a special offering and all these things, and it shows us that the way we do our work in ministry, the way we do our work in church, and the way we volunteer and the way we serve on committees, it's important that we follow these types of standards because God has everything. God gives us a little, and God says, y'all do this. We can't do what God calls us to do if we're lax in the way we deal with his resources. But let's keep trucking. Let's see what else happens in this passage because it's important to see that ministry didn't stop, but also that the people saw that the work was getting done. However, no silver bowls, wick trimmers, sprinkling basins, trumpets, or any articles of gold or silver were made for the Lord's temple from the contributions brought to the Lord's temple. Instead, it was given to those doing the work, and they repaired the Lord's temple with it. No accounting was required from the men who received the silver to pay those doing the work, since they worked with integrity. The silver from the Lord's offering and the sin offerings was not brought to the Lord's temple, since it belonged to the priest. So a couple things here. First, earlier, remember I talked about the college ministry? How the church budgets $1,000 maybe for college students, but someone gives a special offering for that work. You know, it's important that money that someone gave for just that specific work is used for that specific work. That's what we see here. That's this whole thing about no new wick trimmers and no new trumpets, because people need to see that money given for the repair of the temple was used for that purpose. People need to see that it was going forward, that it was happening, that the priests weren't out buying new garments, the priests weren't out buying new trumpets. The priests were making sure that the temple got what it needed to do the repairs. But also we see here this comment about integrity. It's coming about accountability. Now, it's important to note that these guys just weren't willy-nilly spending the money. It wasn't saying, oh, we don't have to check up on them. It was saying that they weren't having to be lorded over. Someone wasn't standing there with an Excel spreadsheet ticking everything off, because the guys who were doing the business, paying the people, taking the money and that type of thing, they were full of integrity. And so they had to be lorded over. It's important for us, if we're dealing with God's resources, whether we are a volunteer in charge of a small budget, or whether we are the person counting the money, or whether we're the person writing the bills or writing the checks and all that stuff, whoever we are in ministry, we need to make sure that we have integrity when dealing with God's resources. But last week we see here this comment about the sin offering, the guilt offering. Now, the type of offering wasn't important, but what's important is that those two sets of offerings, those went specifically to the priest. That's how they made their living, and that's how they provide for their families, and that's how they bought their food for their tables, and that's how they did their work. Well, it's important for us to see here that ministry didn't stop. While the special offering was taking place and the repairs were getting done, the priests were still doing their thing. They might have done it in a different way. They might have had to maybe move something over here or go have a meeting over there because there's orange cones and a sky track over here putting up the new timbers or whatever. But ministry didn't stop. And I think it's important for us to see a couple things on that. You see, when we do a special offering or a dedicated offering, or we do something special like build a building or something like that, it's important to realize that that's not the end-all be-all. The repairs of the temple weren't the end. Joash didn't say, I just want a pretty temple. Joash was saying, we need to do these repairs to further the ministry of the temple itself. And so when we give a special offering to something, whatever it may be, whether it's for, like I said, a building, or whether it's for, we're going to take up this offering to go do this specific new ministry out there in the community. It's a one-time thing we're going to go do. Whatever it is, all those things are supposed to enhance the ministry of the church already, enhance the ministry of God's kingdom already, and help us push us forward into the future. And that's what Joash was doing. He was saying, let's repair the temple, because God's priority is not just the temple. God's priority is the ministry of the temple. God's priority is the advancement of his kingdom. And so that's what we need to remember as we give, as we serve, as we do all these things. The purpose of all that is for God's kingdom advancement. God's kingdom agenda is people. And God wants us to do what needs to be done, give what needs to be done, plan in a certain way, and then go forward so that people can hear the gospel. And that's what Joash is showing us today in this passage. Well, this is a funny passage. You probably didn't come here to learn about church finances and learn about all that, but here I want you to know this. Our priorities are important. The way we give, the way we serve, the way we spend our time and our resources, all that's important because it shows what we love. It shows what we value. So this week I want to encourage you. What do you value? How are you spending your time? How are you spending your resources? How are you shepherding your family and stewarding all of that? So I encourage you, what are your priorities? And how are you going to show godly priorities in the coming week?